Chapter 3. The taste of regret was bitter and cold. The knowledge that their bond was not as strong as it had once been, after all this time, was hard to swallow. It had been difficult when Ken had been taken away by those children protection social workers, and it hadn't helped that the gates had closed without warning, separating them from their beloved partners. They had all been so young, so lost in their own pain, their own desires and wants, so unaware of their futures and the consequences of their actions. Ken had been so distant from them. The abuse he had been forced to endure right under their noses was nothing compared to the mental torment he must have been going through for all these years. It was only natural for him to grow so far out of their reach. They had tried to be there for him, tried to remind him that his friends would always be there to lend a helping hand, that there was no reason to be afraid. But as the years went on, they went on with their lives. Their partners were in the digital world. There was no danger. They were growing older, attending more classes as they prepare for their future careers, and even began dating. Hikari wasn't sure when she and Takaru had drifted away from the others. When had they stopped calling every day to see how everyone was doing? When had they stopped having those weekly meetings? When had the strong bonds they had with their closest friends shattered into tiny pieces? When had everything gone so wrong? Hikari glanced at the small infant, sleeping uneasily in his crib. Kuji had begun to wail as soon as Ken disappeared from their world. He just knew that his father's warm, loving presence was no longer there. It had been painful tending to the small child, knowing full well that it was not she whom he wanted. She was lucky Miyako had been there to calm the wailing infant. She and Lori had always been there for Ken. They had never stopped trying to reach out to him. Their bond had only grown, as hers and Takaru's bond with the former Kaiser crumbled little by little in front of their eyes, just like before. They could have been there to comfort Ken after he had lost Akiyama, but Janai had stopped them. He did something to them to make them forget, only for the memories to return once the identity of the Kaiser was revealed. Hikari and Takaru never once mentioned this to Daisuke, Lori, and Miyako. The shame and guilt had been too much for them to voice into words. If they pretended they had not known, then maybe it had never happened. But it had happened, and she hated herself for it. Ken should never have been the cruel Kaiser. They should have been there to help Ken deal with Millenniumon before he managed to corrupt him. They should have been there when Yggdrasil took them away, placing them at the mercy of his knight. They had needed their help, and they had done nothing at all. They hadn't even noticed they were missing until they saw the Kaiser at the school festival. Ken, Daisuke, Miyako, and Lori could have died, and they wouldn't even have known it until it was too late. Mistakes. That was all she ever made. And she was still making them. She had not been there to comfort Ken when his heart had been shattered. Her internship, schoolwork, and love life had been so much more important than the crumbling life of one of her good friends. She should have been there with Miyako and Lori as they tried to put the shattered pieces back together, tried to convince Daisuke to help them sooner. No, she had only taken action when she had found him on the kitchen floor, bleeding, almost lifeless. "You're doing it again." Miyako leaned against the crib, silently watching the small infant, humming a small, familiar tone when she thought he was about to arouse. Doing what? They weren't as close as they should have been. Miyako's heartbeat was no longer beating in sync with hers. It had not been for many years now. Feeling guilty. Hikari could not meet her eyes. The knowledge that they had allowed them to grow so far apart, that she had not noticed the signs sooner, that she had allowed her friend to get hurt, will always haunt her. The Chosen of Light shook her head sadly. It never stopped. How could I let this happen? Hikari-chan, this wasn't your fault. How? She whispered. I wasn't there for him. I wasn't there for any of you. That's life, Hikari. She looked at her friend as Miyako took a seat on the second chair Ken kept in the room. We all make mistakes. We all do things that we regret. But it is not your fault for Ken being driven to suicide. That is on Kimura. Miyako's features were tight, almost to the point of being murderous. Even as kids, Miyako had always loved Ken. Still did. But she was trying to let him go. Ken only saw her as a good friend. They had all thought Ken and Kimura would be happy together. They had both deeply loved each other and their kids. So why did she say she had never loved him in the first place? That made absolutely no sense. Hikari had never read the letter. She didn't have to. Miyako told her word from word in between angry bursts of murderous rage. She had shattered Ken and took Koichi with her. That had to be the worst thing one could do to another person. She shattered him, Miyako said, so softly that it was uncharacteristic of her. None of us saw it coming. I really thought she loved him. I never would have helped him pick out a wedding ring if I had known she would do this. That just made the situation far worse. He was going to propose? Miyako nodded grimly. Didn't help that Daisuke was blinded by Lee-san's lies. Maybe he could have snapped Ken out of his depression before it had even gotten this bad. And now it was too late. Their friends were lost, trapped in the world of darkness. Maybe. I'm just glad Ken-kun's not alone in that world. Miyako nodded. The world of darkness was not easy to get into, despite what Kushiro thought. The world of darkness was a world separate from the digital world and their own, yet still connected to the two somehow. There was no true portal to enter that world, at least not one that she was aware of. She had only gone there because of her doubts at the time, when those creatures called out to her. She had been teetering between the thin line of light and darkness, allowing her to slip through without her really noticing. Ken was really the only one able to open a portal. He had done it once in their fight against Demon. Although he had been unsure how he managed to do it in the first place, he just did it. Has Daisuke emailed back? Her D-terminal had chimed within the last hour, but she really hadn't checked it for obvious reasons. I think so. She pulled out her D-terminal and saw 3 new messages from Daisuke. She pulled up the first message. They're safe for now. They found a cottage in the forest. Miyako visibly relaxed. Good, that's good. Hopefully, Daisuke could get Ken to take a nap. He really needs it. Hikari nodded and continued reading. Her eyes grew wide and scared as she read the paragraph-long rant from their leader. No, it can't be. She knew she had seen the outline of him behind Ken, but she hadn't wanted it to be true. What? Millenniumon. He's torturing Ken day and night. He's been trying to get Ken to kill himself. Miyako gasped and then half swore, half hissed. That bastard! How can we help him fight an enemy that we can't even see? Hikari had no answer. All she had was a sinking feeling that something wrong was going to happen. She continued reading, despite herself. Hikari read out loud what Daisuke was telling them about the holy beasts and the reason for Ken's lost memories. He talked about Millenniumon and how he was going to murder the bastard. And then he talked about a Digimon they found that was probably now scared of him. A Digimon? Miyako looked at her D-terminal as she opened an attachment. On it was Ken, fast asleep on the sofa, with the Yukimi Botamon nestled in his arms. It too asleep. Ah, it's so cute. Hikari smiled slightly. Ken looked almost peaceful as he slept. But why was there a baby Digimon in the world of darkness? The digital world was supposed to be a safe, colorful place where babies, much like himself, could play and yell all day and all night. But this world was not the digital world. It was dark and cold and so very scary. Yukimi Botamon silently sulked as he remembered the days before his birth. He had been in the village of beginnings, ready to re-enter the world. He couldn't remember his previous life, only the feeling of claws as something killed him without remorse. As he had been hatching, he had felt his Digitama falling, and then landing in a bush of flowers. The world he had been born into was gray and cold. The sound of the battle could be heard over the winds, so he decided to avoid it as best as he could. He had spent a good week looking for food. He was a small, defenseless Digimon. He would need food if he wanted to get big and evolve. And then one day, as if someone had heard his little prayers, he came upon a pile of apples near one of the trees. Starving, he took a bite out of one of the apples. But his happiness could not be sated as a big, scary Digimon with guns approached him, looking unpleased he had taken his food. Yukimi Botamon ran, despite the others' calls for him to stop. He had taken shelter in a hollow tree, and that was where he slept for days, cold, hungry, and terrified. When he tried to venture out again, he had found a small town. The town had been empty. It seemed someone had lived there once upon a time, but no more. He had thought it would be a nice place to rest and search for food, but then hot, burning fire had come from somewhere near the beach, almost hitting him in the process, and instead destroyed the home he had been about to enter. He had never returned to the town, nor the beach as he returned to the forest. He never noticed the cloaked Digimon fighting another, nor a woman silently watching his escape in the distance. He had found the cottage purely by accident. He hadn't cared that the vines were covering it and that it was deep within the scary forest. He just wanted to rest and eat. It had looked like someone had lived within this small cottage at one point, but not for many, many years, if the plastic over the furniture meant anything. There had been a kitchen, a fireplace with 2 sofas in front of it, and a bedroom. Yukimi Botamon was too small to reach any of these things. Exhausted and hungry, the baby Digimon slept deeply under the protection of the sofa. He had never ventured outside the cottage ever again, much too afraid to do so. But every day since he had found the cottage, apples would be found in front of the sofa he slept under. Someone must have taken pity on him. And then, strange humans had found his home of 11 years. He did not dare to confront them, much too afraid to do so. But as hours went by, he realized they were just as scared as he was. He glanced at them from under the sofa. One of them didn't look very good, and was very distressed about something. Yukimi Botamon had listened carefully to the conversation, moving closer to the sobbing human, but did not reveal himself. He had grown bored as the others talked quietly to each other as the sobbing man slept, unpeacefully. He had tried to sleep, but the smell of food had kept him awake. The mysterious figure that had been supplying him with food for the past 11 years had not arrived the day before. He had been hoping they would give him some. And then he felt something evil coming from the human. A shadow of something emerged from his body, trying to harm him, trying to kill him. Yukimi Botamon wanted to help the human, but he was just a baby. And then there was a warm light, followed by a strange beeping from the other man's device. A pink light engulfed the human, chasing the shadow away out of the cottage and into the vast darkness. He had felt drawn to the human's light. It felt warm, comforting, safe. Something he wanted for so long. Whoa! The humans had found a secret passageway hidden behind a library. As they walked into the passageway, which soon turned and led into a vast tunnel, in silence, he trembled, causing the human he had taken a liking to hold him closer to him. He did not like it here. "It's okay, Yuki. Everything will be fine." "If you say so," he wanted to tell him, but the human could not understand him. "Yuki!" Ken merely smiled softly at him. That made him feel warm and fuzzy inside, although he couldn't understand why. They continued walking through the strange tunnel in silence. Something was not right here. The tunnel seemed to be man-made, but who would make such a long tunnel? He soon found his answer as they came to the end of the tunnel. The tunnel opened up to a huge room with a flight of stairs going up into somewhere. Boxes littered the space, and many of the items they saw as they passed by seemed to be toys and clothing, and the personal effects of a small child. A dusty bed was seen in the far corner, along with a table and more boxes of books. Ken looked into one of the boxes and picked up a small toy. It was a teddy bear, worn from play and dusty from sitting in a box for what must have been years. "What is all this stuff?" the female adult asked. "A storage room, maybe," the male that had hit him with the bat said. "Looks like it could have been a child's room at one point." Ken did not respond, which the other two noticed. "Ken, you okay?" The man placed a hand on the other's shoulder. Ken's hands had been shaking slightly. His voice trailed off as he stared at the toy. His brows were furrowed, his eyes unfocused, as if he was trying to remember something. "I think I've been here before." "You have?" the other two adults said. Ken frowned in uncertainty as he rubbed his right temple, almost as if he were in pain. Never mind, let's keep going." The two humans looked at each other as Ken placed the toy back in the box, but Yukimi Botamon wasn't having it. He jumped out of Ken's arms and returned with the toy in his mouth. Ken paused, a single brow raised. "You want it?" "Yes. Yuki!" He never had a toy before. The gentle smile returned as Ken shifted the toy so that Yukimi Botamon could snuggle against it. Once that was done, the three humans went up the stairs. It wasn't that long of a walk, but the other male still complained about something called an elevator. As they made it to the top, some kind of door stood in their way. The door was old, and it seemed it had not been used for quite some time. Ken tried to open the door, but it would not budge with him alone. It had taken the three of them to push the door open. The door made a loud, squeaky noise as it opened up into a huge dining room. The walls were littered with paintings of 7 different Digimon. One was of the Digimon alone, while others were with 2, 3, or all 7. In some of the paintings, there was a small boy that looked like a younger version of Ken. In the middle of the room was a huge table filled to the brim with food. 8 chairs surrounded the huge table, and sitting at the table were 4 ultimates. The 4 Digimon were staring at them in shock. And something else. Relief Sadness? Hope, maybe? Ken? How? How is this even possible? The paintings were the first thing he saw. The evidence confirmed that he had indeed been in this castle before, but he couldn't wrap his mind around it. He had to be at least between the ages of 3 and 8 in these huge paintings. Ken knew he must have been very young, but wouldn't he remember being around 7 ultimate-level Digimon for almost 5 years? It looked like they had been so close. Every time a memory, before the time he had met Wormmon, would try to resurface, a searing pain would travel from the back of his head to his temple, forcing the image to retreat once again out of his grasp. Whatever this spell was, it was all too clear that the holy beasts had not wanted him to remember something. Something about these Digimon. Ken turned his attention to the 4 Digimon sitting at the table. The door had caught their attention. Ken glanced at each Digimon, their names lost to him due to the spell, but they felt so familiar. He had known them personally, had been very close to them, but he couldn't remember. Ken, is that really you? It was the Digimon with the purple mask asking this time. The surprise in his voice was the same as the female Digimon. They were standing up now, and making their way towards them. Daisuke and Motomiya were still standing behind him, looking between the obvious paintings of him and the Digimon in front of them. Do you know them, Ken? Ken hesitated. He wanted to say no, wanted to say that he did not know them. He couldn't be the only Ken in the human world that just so happened to be involved with Digimon. Then again, he and Hikari had been the only ones to travel to the world of darkness. He could say yes, but then that would be a lie too. He couldn't remember them, even if he did know them. I don't know, he said very slowly, carefully. One wrong move could be their last. Pain could be seen in their eyes. Ken did not recognize them, and it hurt, all the way up to their cores. Demon was right, the female Digimon said, shocked at the lack of recognition. The holy beasts really did make you forget about us. The 3 males behind her were now seething in anger. Those backstabbing assholes! The one with the mask hissed, his arms waving in front of him as he seethed in anger. We have done everything they asked. We left the digital world so they wouldn't kill all the virus and demon Digimon. We created the fucking crests for them. Hell, Lucimon even allowed himself to be taken as prisoner when they threatened to kill you after you got hit by the Dark Seed! He yelled, gesturing to the 3 confused humans. What more can they take from us? As the Digimon yelled and ranted, memories of the past came forth. They somehow bypassed the searing pain of the spell placed on him and filled his mind. His birth parents had never gotten along, even after he was born. His parents fought, and at times his father would lash out. It was almost always at his mother, but there would be times he would bruise up his boys. Ken had been too young to really remember what they had been talking about, but it was obviously about his brother. Osamu had started to show his advanced intelligence when Ken had been around the age of 3. It was around this time the 2 of them left home for hours on end, attending commercials and interviews and competitions. And sometimes Ken would be left home alone for days, without food, without water, without the love that he craved. Osamu tried his best to be there for him. Someone so young should not be neglected to the point of being forgotten. But their father would always be there to yell at him and lock him in his bedroom as punishment. He would be in that room for hours and hours, crying, not realizing that no one was there to hear his cries. It had been on one of those days, when he accidentally opened up a portal to the world of darkness. He had been alone on that cold beach, frightened and scared, until an angel with black and white wings found him and took him home with him. Lucimon. Ken remembered looking up to him, wishing his own father had been as nice and kind and loving as he was. Memories of the other members of the Demon Lords came to light. Lilithmon had been the mother figure that had filled the void in his soul when his own mother had been too afraid to protect him. Beelzebumon had been the overly protective older brother that played with him when Osamu could not. Demon, much to his surprise, had been like one of those grumpy uncles that hated everything, but really didn't. The two of them had loved being in the library together. Demon would always read him stories of the battles they had against the Royal Knights. Much like Demon, Leviamon, who was currently Dagomon, Belphamon, and Barbamon all took up the role of an uncle. Leviamon had been the one to teach him how to swim and how to survive in the forest with the Lost Ones if he ever got lost. Belphamon had been his sleeping buddy, and Barbamon was the one to teach him how to read and write Digimoji, as well as teaching him how to use his abilities. Where there was light, there was darkness. Where there was a queen of the digital world, there was also a king. Tears fell down his cheeks. The holy beasts had a chosen of light, yet they were ashamed to have one of darkness. Ken tried to blink the tears away as he stared at them, but he found it so hard to do so. Lilithmon, Beelzebumon, Barbamon, Belphamon. His voice trembled with each name he spoke out, as he matched each name with the faces he recalled from his memories. The four Digimon smiled, realizing that their presence must have bypassed the workings of the spell that was placed on him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to forget you. It's okay, Lilithmon soothed as she brushed the tears away. Everything's going to be okay. But it was not okay. A searing, blinding pain shot through his head. Ken barely noticed the makings of the seal appearing on his forehead as it traveled down the side of his face, around his neck, down his shoulders, and wrapping around his torso like a viper. The markings were hot and painful. He could feel the strange magic trying to suck the life out of him, trying to kill him as punishment for remembering. A gasp of pain left his lips as he crumbled. Yukimimon Bodamon fell out of his arms, but was caught by Lilithmon before the others could react, and tossed to Daisuke, which the baby flinched and cried at. Ken could only feel the searing pain of death as it tightened and tightened its grasp on him. He was barely aware of the female Demon Lord catching him before his head hit the ground. He was barely aware of her lifting him into her arms. They were moving then, but he barely noticed. He withered in agony, gasping for air that the holy beast's magic would not allow him to take in. They wanted him dead, despite everything he had done for them. Why? What had he done to deserve this torture? What's happening? Daisuke sounded very far away as the Digimon ran down unfamiliar halls to somewhere underground. The seal, Barbamon answered. It's trying to kill him. They hadn't always lived in the world of darkness. They had once lived in the digital world, reigning over the virus, Nightmare Soldier, and Demon Digimon, while Lady Bastamon ruled over the Beast, Man, and Data Digimon. Lord Felismon ruled over the unknown, Free, and Warrior Digimon. Holy Angemon ruled over the Vaccine, Holy, and Angelic Digimon. And King and Queen Chessmon ruled over the Puppet, Cyborg, and Variable-type Digimon within their Chessmon Empire. There had been other smaller villages and kingdoms too, but for the most part, They were the main 6 kingdoms in the digital world at the time. The arrangement between the 6 of them kept the balance. For the most part, none of them went over each other's authority as they worked together, looking after the Digimon they cared for. But not all was perfect. There were many times in which a Digimon tried to overpower them, tried to kill a Digimon from another kingdom. It was in their data to be naturally cruel, sometimes evil, and greedy for power. But that did not stop them from putting those Digimon in their place. There was no place for disobedience, for such vile behavior in time of peace. For a time, all had been peaceful and right. He couldn't quite figure out what the Dark Masters did to cause homeostasis to summon children to their world. They had done nothing wrong, but following their orders to track down a disturbance they detected on the border of their kingdom. And then, the holy beasts came into being. They had wanted complete and utter genocide of all virus Digimon as they tried to bend the entire digital world under their rule. Many monarchies and small kingdoms had fallen, the leaders imprisoned or destroyed. The holy beasts would have stood no chance against all 7 of them, and they knew it. The attack on their kind, with the threat they would wipe out each and every one of them, was all they needed to get them to submit to their will. They had left the digital world, sealed away in a world that had once been a part of the digital world, for the survival of their kind. The holy beasts had kept their promise to not harm the virus Digimon, for the most part, but the damage they caused was so much worse. The power of light and darkness was a delicate balance. The 2 entities were brothers, sisters, yin and yang. One could not exist without the other, and one side should never be more powerful than the other. But sometimes, when the balance tips, the entities would take on a physical form. Normally, this usually only happens once in every 500,000 years. But the entities were 499,500 years early, in the form of Ken Ichijuji and Hikari Yagami. There was no doubt that Ken was their king. It was why they were so protective of him ever since he accidentally made a portal, due to his want to be loved by someone, when his own family had been too blinded to do so. They adored the little boy since the moment they found him, loved him like he was their own. If they had known of the horror those supposed gods would put him through, then maybe they wouldn't have submitted to their will so easily. Millenniumon had only allowed himself to be captured, his power restrained, because he wanted to protect the boy the holy beasts threatened once he'd been of no use to them. But that had been a lie. All of it had been a lie. They used him, still were using him, and that was what hurt most of all. They had all been close to their king, but Beelzebumon and Demon had been particularly close to him. Ken and Beelzebumon were always doing something mischievous together, while Ken and Demon had that silent peace around them that no one understood. The knowledge of their deceit and the pain and suffering the child had been forced to endure was the reason why Demon was so furious. When the barriers had been weakened by Black War Greymon, Demon had been the only one to escape the world of darkness. Demon had wanted to find Millenniumon, help him escape his prison. Ken was the key to finding him. He was the last to see Millenniumon alive. But with the seal in place, Ken's memories were sealed away. Demon may have gotten a bit too angry, causing the child to see him as a possible threat, when that was not the case. Dagamon groaned as Demon seethed in anger. The two would spar every week in hopes it would help with Demon's anger that had yet to subside from his encounter with the Chosen. It wasn't exactly working all too well after 14 years. But their sparring had come to a halt as they faced against Millenniumon. The evil god was now gloating about everything he had done to their king. They could not really touch him due to his lack of physical form. They were just going to have to fix that now, weren't they? As the other laughed, the crowns of envy and wrath appeared on their forearms. A sinister, merciless laugh tore from their throats as they gazed at each other with wicked grins. It was time for some payback. What's so funny? Oh, if only he knew. Tell me, Millenniumon. Demon's voice was as cold as ice. Has anyone ever told you it is unwise to harm the king? Ken gasped and whimpered in her arms as they entered the ritual chamber that they had prepared long ago. A circular marble table, engraved with all 7 sins, rested in the middle of the room. 7 massive pillars, each the colors of their respective crowns, surrounded the circle. It hurts. Ken's whimper broke her heart. She loved Ken like he was her own son. In the past, she had hated the fact that they had to let him go home to those humans at the end of each day. They had obviously been neglecting him, but she knew she had to let him go. They could not force him to stay, yet he always returned to them until that day. It's okay. We're going to fix this. Every Digimon had been aware that the king and queen had been reborn. It was an unspoken rule that it was forbidden to harm them. Those who did either died a horrible death or were shunned by every single Digimon. The holy beasts knew this. If they outright harmed Ken, no Digimon would follow them. They would be destroyed in a heartbeat for hurting their king and queen. They could not control the Digimon if they all unified to rebel against them. So they hurt him secretly, out of the public eye. The seal had many purposes. Not only did it suppress memories, but it had also been a tool to temporarily control him. That was how Ken got the idea to be the Kaiser. But Millenniumon and Vamdemon had gotten in the way, unknowingly wakening the seal's power. This worked in their favor. The seal hadn't harmed him until now. The holy beasts had threatened them to stay away from him. Their presence would have an inverse effect on him, allowing him to remember despite the seal. But with his memories returned, the seal's fatal purpose was now active: to kill darkness. Without darkness, light would be the only one left in the world until darkness was able to recover and reform in 500,000 years. But by then, the holy beasts would have the power to wipe out all who stood in their way. The digital world, the human world, all worlds would be thrown into complete and utter chaos. I don't understand. Why would the holy beasts want to kill Ken? The Chosen was frantic, but she was glad Barbamon was there to explain everything to him. Once Ken was resting on the table, she gave his hand a small squeeze of reassurance before making her way around the table to light each white candle resting on each of the 7 pillars. Releasing the 7 crowns of sin was the only way to destroy the holy beast seal. But there was a small problem. Lucemon was not here. She prayed he was still alive and able to hear her call. It did not take long to light all 7 candles, but with each candle she lit, she could feel the seal growing stronger and stronger. They did not have time to wait for Demon and Leviamon. They had to work fast. Ken was slipping. Lilithmon, we can't remove the seal without Lucemon, Beelzebumon said as he walked over to his pillar. Red eyes glared at his brother as Ken withered in agony, sobbing softly as he tried to take in air. Barbamon walked over to his pillar, leaving the 2 shocked humans and the struggling Yukimi Botamon near the entrance. And we don't know if this will even work. Lucemon is alive. He will answer our call, even if he is far away. He must have faith in him. He frowned. Yeah, but... He began to protest. We don't have time. I will not allow the holy beasts to win this time. Lilithmon fisted her right hand and rested it against her open palm. Her form glowed a soft green as the crown of lust appeared on her right cheek. When light destroys the innocent and the pure, when what is good and just are tarnished, darkness will come to restore what is lost. Let lust shine so big and bright to restore thy broken heart. Material items are things of a long-forgotten past. Let greed ground the soul and fix what has been shattered. Barbamon glowed purple as the crown of greed appeared on his right hand. Empty and alone, the soul cannot compare. Let gluttony fill you up to live anew. Beelzebumon glowed yellow as the crown of gluttony appeared above his third eyes. The endless pain of rage seems endless and alluring. Allow sloth to soothe what has been hurt. Belphamon glowed a dark blue as the crown of sloth appeared on his left forearm. As they spoke, a ring of energy appeared above them, changing colors with each crown they released into it. When all seems lost, sorrow blocking one's path, envy will paint the way to a bridge of new possibilities. Demon and Leviamon rushed into the room from one of the many entrances that led outside the castle. When light burns, when light rages, only wrath will be there to open a new path, to part the disguised darkness that traps and binds. As the two made their way to their pillars, Lilithmon noticed they were not alone. Bonded by Demon's dark magic, wrapped in chains of black, was Millenniumon. Well, look who decided to join us. The self-proclaimed evil god roared and cursed at them as he struggled to free himself from his binds. But it was to no avail. They were not going to let him go without facing the consequences. Let me go, vermins. No, she said simply, her voice showing none of her inner fury. You broke the law, Millenniumon. We will force you to understand why death always comes to those who harm the king. She wanted to say more, wanted to gloat and embrace his torment. But those thoughts fluttered away as a portal above Lucimon's pillar opened. When light falls, darkness will be there to embrace. When darkness cries, pride will lend a helping hand. When light soars, crumbling all in its way. When darkness falls into the depths of the alluring melody, pride will be there to silence the light, will be there to lift the darkness and return to the light of the everlasting. Lilithmon lifted her eyes to the portal as a powerful energy, so familiar, so alluring, so enchanting, joined the circle of energy and dark magic. As the crown of pride joined the others, Lilithmon could not stop the tears of pure joy from escaping. Lucimon! The child-level smiled as he stared back at his beloved. A second of longing passed between them before a blast headed straight for the Demon Lord. Lucimon dodged gracefully like the angel that he was, completely destroying Indaramon before he could even gather his wits. There were only 4 now. The holy beasts could be heard in the background, yelling at the Devas who were starting to realize that this was a battle they could not win. Lucimon glanced over his shoulder with a glare at the remaining Devas and their masters. An uncontained fury was in those blue eyes, one that promised death. Death of the worst kind. Lucimon was soon on the move, dodging yet another round of attacks. Majiramon had thought yanking the chains still encased around Lucimon's wrists and ankles would be a good idea. Grand Cross! The chains were gone, and so was Majiramon. It looked like hours had gone by as they watched their leader battle the Devas on the ruins of Janai's home. But in reality, it was only seconds, and those seconds felt like an eternity before the portal began to fade away. "Lucimon!" Lucimon glanced back at his friends, his family. "I'll be fine," he said. "Save him. Remove that damn seal." And then he was gone. They all took a deep breath, feeling the combined energies of the 7 sins, but the fight was far from over. The circle grew bright as they swirled around and around above them, and within seconds, following their unconscious desire, sucked Millenniumon's soul into it. "No!" he screamed, withering away as he was sucked in, unable to break free. "You can't do this!" Once he was completely sucked in, the light exploded down, engulfing Ken's weak body in a warm, bright light that made it impossible to see past their fingers. Lilithmon shielded her eyes for a brief moment before closing them. The light soon expanded as it moved beyond the table and towards them. As they too were engulfed by the light, their forms became unseeable by the humans in the room. "What's going on?" "Yuki! Yuki!" The humans' voices became distant, far and in between, as her soul was freed from her body, allowing them to enter the void that Ken was currently lost within. "Hang on. We're coming,"